This is where we start our conversation with the gentleman from Maryland. Congressman Glenn Ivey is with us, Democrat representing Maryland's 4th District, which I drive through every day on my way to work. Congressman, it's great to see you. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you in person here. I'm not going to drag you through this campaign stuff for our entire conversation because there are a couple of issues I'd really like to hit with you. But let's start there. The rhetoric that we're hearing in this campaign is one that's concerning a lot of folks, as we're now regressing into racial tropes, stolen valor, the rest that you're hearing along with us. How does the Harris-Walz campaign respond to that?
Well, so far I think they've been able to almost ignore it because many of those comments contain critiques within themselves.
Is that the best defense?
Yeah, I think it depends. I'll have to see how things play out. And if he keeps doing press conferences like the one yesterday where it's just one bizarre statement after another. Yeah. The January 6th comments, for example, where you've had, I think, over 1,000 people have been convicted of criminal offenses, some for sedition and things like that. He keeps trying to downplay these things and act like they were just tourists there that day, but that's obviously preposterous. So, he'll keep undermining his own campaign the way your commentators talked about previously. I'm pleased with the way Harris and Walz are focusing on issues I think American voters are more interested in hearing about, some of which you just touched on a few minutes ago, like the economy.
Yeah.
And I think we have to, stay on our track, and I don't know if they'll ever get on track themselves, but I think we're going in the right direction.
Should Governor Walz clarify some of the questions about his military career? Is that part of the campaign?
Yeah, I think he's talked about that some. My view so far is that, I think the focus has been on the use of the term war. The United States was at war essentially with, over in Afghanistan at the time. So I think it's factually correct on its face. But the larger piece, he was in, I think, the Guard for 24 years,
That's
if I'm
correct.
not mistaken.
Yes.
And
he left 2 months before his unit deployed to Iraq. They're saying that he abandoned his brothers in arms. That's a heavy charge.
It's a heavy charge. I think he left to run for Congress. I thought it was
That's
10
correct.
months, too, but
Okay.
maybe I've got the wrong number. But the bottom line is there's no indication of any kind of misconduct or stolen valor or anything along those lines. And when you contrast that with Donald Trump, who pretty much ducked out on service during the Vietnam era, he got the doctor in his father's building to give him a bone spurs deferral.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know that he
times,
can.
I believe.
Yeah, I don't know if he can cast the first stone. So,
well, you wonder if they're trying to encourage that debate, which would be curious, Congressman. I guess broadly, though, we're talking about, they're calling this the vibes campaign. There's this new energy that has changed the ground under our feet. You can speak to that as you wish. You're a Democrat. I'm sure you're very excited about what's happening. But have you ever seen a moment like this where an aircraft carrier of a presidential campaign turned on a dime?
No.
This has been in 2 weeks.
Yeah, this is pretty dramatic. And, the Obama campaign in 2008 had similar kinds of energy, but it took a long time for it to ramp up to that point. A little bit 1968, Bobby Kennedy, just as he was hitting his stride before he was assassinated. But that's kind of it in my recollection. And, I think she's doing a couple things with that are positive. One is she's sustaining it. It looks like the Walz pick. I know there were some people that wanted other selections, but it looks like it's worked out very well and sort of rallied the troops in any event, including, people who wanted other candidates to be picked. And I think she's also continuing to dominate the media. I think part of the reason Trump had the press conference yesterday was he's been sidelined in part by his own silly comments, but also because of the rise of her campaign. And I think he's trying to figure out a way to get back into it. They had Vance following them around for a couple of days, kind of nose pressed up against the window. Yeah, it was kind of funny. But, it's clear that they're a little desperate and confused about how to go forward.
Does she need to hold a
message.
news conference, do some of these interviews? That's the challenge right now, is that she's not answering questions.
Yeah, I don't mind, her doing that. I think it's there's going to be plenty of time for a variety of types of news conferences like that. But the introducing herself and her vice presidential candidate, I think, are the way to go right now. So I like the speeches in the battleground states. The big rallies make sense. Continuing to push the high energy events make a lot of sense. And, she can ride that out, I think, going forward.
I want to ask you about the Senate race in Maryland. You've endorsed Angela Also Brooks, who's running against a Republican who's not talking a lot like a Republican, Larry Hogan, your former governor, is criticizing Donald Trump. He's very disappointed, he said, by the news conference. What we need to do is focus on the issues. He held a news conference, an interview, I should say, rather, with Punchbowl. And he was talking about his opponent, Angela Alsobrooks, of course, Prince George's County executive who's running for an historic candidacy for Senate.
Right.
Larry Hogan said, my opponent really wants to make this about red versus blue. Just Democrat versus Republican. Probably take the names off the ballots and all of our records and say you have to vote blue. Our campaign, he says, is about red, white, and blue. Is there some truth to that?
Not on the ads that I've seen.
Okay.
The ads I've seen, he's running as a Democrat, basically. So he said, yesterday I saw one of his ads, it's choosing people over politics.
Okay.
Now that is the House Democrats slogan for this cycle. That's
what we hear from Hakeem Jeffries.
Yeah, exactly. And then he talked about abortion.
So he's not a real Republican, is what you're saying.
Well, he certainly isn't running on their issues, and he's a million miles away from what Donald Trump's focus could be, I suppose, given what his commentaries have been. The problem is twofold. One is his record, which is, I think, more significant than what he's saying now. He was never supportive, particularly of abortion rights, and so he was able to get away with that because his races for governor occurred before Dobbs repealed Roe v. Wade. Now he can't do that, and the big problem he's got is that if he does get elected, he's already said he would sit with the Republican caucus. What that would mean is 51 votes. That has an impact on future Supreme Court selections, which certainly Democrats in Maryland are troubled by what Trump's done in the Supreme Court already. And then on the abortion issue, which there's a huge wing in the Republican Party that really wants to nationalize the bans that have taken place in some states. And then you get to gun violence and other issues along those lines where, the Republicans, for example, just on guns, ghost guns. You can't get one Republican co-sponsor to ban ghost guns in the House, which is crazy. I mean, the only reason you would have a ghost gun is if you want to evade prosecution because there's no serial numbers on
These
it.
are the guns with the serial numbers scratched.
That's right.
Yeah,
guns are made without serial numbers at all, just so that you can avoid prosecution. We can't get one Republican co-sponsor. He's not going to be able to duck those kinds of issues, I don't think, as we go forward.
As you consider all the questions you hear, the issues that arise from Oxon Hill, from your district, and now the need for money to rebuild the Francis Scott Key Bridge, in our remaining moment, how are you going to get that done? Is that in the lame duck? Is it next year? How do you get the money?
I think the push is to try and get it done now, and obviously what happens in November could have an impact on that in a very significant way.
Yeah.
We need to get the funding up front for the bridge because it's going to take years for the insurance cases.
So you need to get this done before the election, is your point?
Well, I'm saying that depending on who wins, I don't know what Trump would do if he gets elected.
That would jeopardize funding for the bridge, you think?
I think it could. Yeah, I mean, there's some of the things that he's talked about and the Trump Project 2025. Policy positions. You're talking about all kinds of radical changes. Another one, the House Republicans came out with a paper to eliminate building the new FBI headquarters and shut that down, even though we've been awarded that in Maryland.
That's right.
And try and move the whole thing to Alabama, which is like a little,
little crazy. They wanted to go to Quantico. Hang on a second. Congressman, I'm really glad you came in. We want to keep tabs with you, and I want to see you in Chicago. You're going to be at the DNC, right?
Absolutely. I look forward to seeing you there.
Let's make a plan. We'll meet right here on this program. Glenn Ivey, the Democrat from Maryland, Oxon Hill. As I said, we drive through the district every day on our way to work. We'll have a lot more ahead. This is Bloomberg.